Welcome to Burn the Rules with Chet Hirani. This podcast is for people who know leadership isn't about titles, noise, or ticking boxes. It's about how you think, how you show up, and how you perform when pressure is real. I'm Chet Hirani, and I work with leaders and high performers across business, sport, and life all over the world who want to take control of how they lead and perform. Not by copying someone else's rules, but by understanding themselves first. Every conversation here is grounded in experience, reflection, and practical insight. So if you're ready to question what leadership has been taught to be and decide what it means for you, you're in the right place. There's a question I want you to sit with before we go any further. How many of your decisions this week were shaped up by what you actually believe, and how many were shaped by what you wanted other people to think of you? And be honest, because if you're like most of the leaders I work with, the answer is going to be uncomfortable, because somewhere along the way, you've stopped leading from what you believed and started leading from what you thought would keep the room calm. And that's what we're talking about today, the most camouflaged leadership trap I know, the one nobody calls themselves out for, because it doesn't look like weakness. It looks like being a good person. It looks like being collaborative. Okay. And it also looks like being emotionally intelligent, but it's not. It's approval seeking, and it's costing you more than you know. Welcome to Burn the Rules. I'm Chet Hirani, your host and author of now two-time award-winning bestseller, Burn the Rules, Lead from Within. And today's episode is called The Cost of Being Liked. And if you've been following this podcast, we've talked about the old rules, fear, judgment, busyness, your team breaking, and the office debate. Here's what I haven't told you yet. There's one common thread running underneath all of them. One thing that quietly drives most of the leadership dysfunction I see, and it's the need to be liked, the need to be approved of, the need to keep everyone comfortable. And by the end of this episode, you're going to see it everywhere in your own leadership. And then I'm going to give you a way through it all. So let me describe a leader to you and see if you recognize them. They're smart, they're experienced, they care about their team. People genuinely like them. They're known for being approachable, for being collaborative, for being good to work with. On paper, they're doing everything right. But underneath that, something's off. Decisions get delayed because they don't want to upset anyone. Tough conversations get softened to the point where the message doesn't land. Underperformers stay too long because the leader can't bring themselves to have that hard talk, and strategic disagreements get smoothed over rather than worked through. And slowly, quietly, the organization underneath them starts to drift. Not because the leader is bad, but because the leader is too light. And this is the most under-discussed leadership failure in corporate life. And it's the one I see most often in executives who have everything else figured out, because approval seeking doesn't look like weakness. It looks like being a good leader. It looks like emotional intelligence. It looks like leading with empathy. But here's the difference between empathy and approval seeking. And I want you to write this down. If you're driving or walking, remember it. Empathy is understanding what someone feels. Approval seeking is changing your behavior so they keep feeling good about you. One is leadership, the other is performance. And most leaders can't tell which one they're doing. So I want to tell you something about my family, something I talk about quite a lot, and I want to share it here with you as well. And it's all about approval. Yeah. So my father, his name is Manji, my mother's name is Jaya, and they did something in their generation that in the culture they were raised in was almost unthinkable. They chose love over tradition, a love marriage in a community that demanded arranged ones. And when they made that choice, they didn't do it with their family's blessing. No approval, no blessing. Just the two of them choosing to build something their way. And the cost, they were seen as having rejected the rules. They lost the comfort of being approved of. They lost the easy path. They had to build everything from scratch. But here's what they gained, and what I watched growing up. They gained alignment. Their life matched their values. Every brick of what they built, they laid themselves. And the version of them I grew up watching wasn't the version that was performing from anyone's approval. It was the version that was completely unapologetically themselves. And that's where I get my edge from. No nonsense approach, my willingness to challenge clients on the things they don't want to hear, my refusal to follow a path just because it's familiar. I learned that real leadership isn't about fitting in, it's about standing firm in what you believe, even when no one's clapping, especially then. And here's the question I want you all to sit with. If my parents had chased approval instead of alignment, I wouldn't be sitting here recording this podcast. They wouldn't have built the life they built. There wouldn't be an NYOC. There wouldn't be a book. There wouldn't be a TED Talk. The cost of approval would have been a life that looked acceptable but felt empty. Now ask yourself this. What's the cost of yours? So how does approval seeking actually show up in leadership? Because it's rarely obvious. It hides, it disguises itself, its virtues. Here's where to look. So number one, there's feedback you need to give. There's a performance issue you need to address. There's a behavior in your team that's slowly ending the culture. And every time you sit down to address it, the conversation comes out softer and a lot softer than you planned. You add 3 caveats. Literally you sandwich it. With so many compliments, the message disappears. You leave the room and the person you spoke to has no idea what you actually meant. That's approval seeking. It looks like kindness. It's actually cowardness in a nicer outfit. And the person on that receiving end suffers more than anyone because they never get the chance to fix what they don't know is broken. Number 2, the decision you delay is consensus. You know what the right call is. You've already worked it out because instead of making it, you set up another meeting. You ask for input from people who don't need to be involved. You frame it as wanting buy-in, as an inclusive leadership. But what you're really doing is spreading responsibility so that if it goes wrong, you're not the only one to blame. That's not collaboration, that's insurance. And your team can feel the difference. They know when their input matters and when it's theater. And the more you do this, the less they trust your judgment because you've shown them you don't trust it either. Number 3, the version of yourself you perform at the top. Right. This one's the hardest to spot because it feels essential. You change your tone for leadership, for senior leadership. You change your language for the board. You laugh at jokes that aren't funny. You agree with positions you don't hold. You tell yourself it's political awareness. Somewhere along the way, the version of you that shows up at the top is no longer the version of you that shows up at home. And the people working underneath you can see the seam between the two. They know when you're performing, and it makes everything you ever say about authenticity sound hollow here. So let me tell you about the moment I learned this all myself. It was roughly about 2012. I was very early into my coaching, building NYOC from scratch, and I decided to host my first workshop. And I want you to know I prepared for that workshop like I was preparing for a TED Talk. I obsessed over every slide, every word, every transition. I wanted it to be perfect. Why? Not because perfection serves the audience, because perfection protects you from criticism. It was approval seeking dressed up as professionalism. And then the day came. Nothing went to plan. Basically, I didn't get the turnout I expected. I stumbled over my words more than once. The tech glitched halfway through. The polished, perfect version I built in my head fell apart in real time. And I had no choice in that moment that I'll never forget. I had a choice, that I'll never forget. I could perform through it, keep up with the polished mask, pretend nothing was wrong, finish the workshop on autopilot and hope nobody noticed. Or I could drop the mask, acknowledge it, be human, and just lead the session with what was actually true in the room. I chose the second one, almost by accident. I stopped. I apologized for the tech. I told them I'd planned this differently. And I said, let's just have a real conversation about leadership instead. What happened next surprised me. The energy in that room shifted. People relaxed, they opened up, the conversation got deeper than anything I'd planned. And by the end, several of them told me it was the best workshop they'd ever been to. Not because it was polished, but because it was real. That's when I learned the truth. The thing I'd been trying to protect myself from, looking imperfect, being judged, not being approved of, was the very thing that was holding me back from doing the work that mattered. The mask was the obstacle. Dropping it was the breakthrough. And that's the trap with approval seeking. It promises safety. What it actually delivers is invisibility. You can't connect with anyone when you're performing. You can only connect when you are real. So let me leave you with something to do. Not just something to think about, because approval seeking is one of those traps that doesn't shift through reflection alone. It shifts through action. So the first one, identify the conversation you're avoiding, not abstractly, specifically. Name the person, name the topic, name what you've been telling yourself about why now isn't the right time. Because if you're honest, the real reason isn't timing. The real reason is that you don't want the temporary discomfort of being seen as the bad guy. Have the conversation this week, not next week, not when things settle down. This week, and do it cleanly, with care, with respect, but without softening the message so much it disappears. Number 2, audit your last 3 big decisions. For each one, ask, did I make this because it was right or because it would keep the room calm? Be honest with yourself here. The answers will tell you exactly how much approval seeking is running your leadership without your permission. Awareness is the first move. Action is the second one here. And number 3, find the moment this week where you'd normally perform, where you soften, hedge, or change your tone to be liked, and don't. Say what you actually think. Make the call you actually believe in. Be the version of you at the top of the building that you are at the bottom. Just once, see what happens, because here's what I've learned when I'm coaching executives globally. The version of you that drops the mask is the version of you that finally starts to lead. So, to summarize what I've spoken about today, my parents could have stayed where they were. They could have chosen the arranged marriage route. They could have kept the family's approval, the community's blessing, the easy path. They didn't. And the life they built, the one that they gave me, everything I have today, was only possible because they chose alignment over approval. That's the choice that's sitting in front of you too. Not a dramatic maybe, not as life-altering on the surface, but every single day, in every meeting, in every decision, you're choosing approval or alignment, performance or presence, the version of you that's liked or the version of you that's real. And here's the thing I want you to hold on to here. The leaders I've worked with who finally drop the mask, who stop trying to be liked and start trying to be honest, they don't lose people. They lose the wrong people. They're the ones who only liked the performance. And what they gained is the trust, the respect, and the loyalty of the right people. The ones who needed someone to actually lead them, not entertain them. That's what leading from within actually means. Not leading from ego, not leading from fear, leading from the version of you that doesn't need permission to exist. If this episode resonated with you in some way, share it with another leader who needs to hear it. If you want to go deeper, grab a copy of my book, Burn the Rules, Lead from Within. And if you're ready to stop chasing approval and start building the kind of leadership that doesn't need it, simply reach out. I'm Chet Hirani. This is Burn the Rules, and I'll see you on the next one. Before you go, take a moment to think about what stayed with you from this conversation. Not what sounded impressive, but what challenged how you think, decide, or lead. See, leadership isn't something you wait for. It's something you practice internally, daily, and deliberately. And remember this, you can't lead a life that matters by following rules that don't. If this episode gave you perspective, share it with someone who's ready to take more control of how they lead and perform. And subscribe wherever you listen, and keep redefining leadership on your own terms.